Okay, so now we're going to get into sort of a more technical thing, and this is sort of where a lot of the debate amongst economists lies. Okay, lots of the debate that's going on in the field of labor economics is here, and I want to kind of summarize it for you and give you sort of an understanding. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about in this video are what are called monopsonies. Okay, so we've all talked about monopolies before in other classes. So in your 222 class, for example, you talked about monopolies and how they restrict output and raise price. Okay, and the reason they can do that is because they are the only seller of the good or service in that market, right? Well, a monopsony is sort of the opposite, right? And by opposite, I don't mean that there's lots of sellers. I actually mean that there's just one buyer. Only or single buyer, right? So where a monopoly is a situation where there's only one seller, a monopsony is a situation where there's only one buyer. Okay, and in our case, or in this class, the thing that's being bought is labor. Okay, and so we see these types of things, we imagine these types of things here and there. So we can imagine, a town in West Virginia, let's say, that's a mining town, right? Or we can imagine sort of the city of Detroit in the 50s and 60s, right? Where basically everyone worked for, Ford, GM, or Chrysler, right? Any situation where there's basically only a single buyer or very few buyers, we have what we could call a monopsony, okay? And what it stems from, what the whole problem is this upward sloping labor supply curve for the firm, right? So remember earlier in this week's lecture notes, we talked about, or in the videos, we talked about how if it's costly to switch jobs, or if it's annoying to switch jobs, individual firms will have an upward sloping supply curve. Now I've drawn it, very upward sloping, just to sort of illustrate the point here. Okay, but the point is with this upward sloping curve generates some amount of monopsony power. And so let's go through and see if we can figure out where it comes from. So let's start with sort of the stylized view of the world, where we have the horizontal wage rate. Okay, and so in this world, the marginal expense of labor is going to be exactly equal to the wage, right? So whatever, if I want to hire 10, 11, 12, 13, etc., right? Each additional hour just costs me W. Whatever the wage is, that's how much it costs. So here, let's say the wage is 10, right? This will cost me 100. This will cost me 110, 120, 130, right? And so the marginal expense of hiring one more labor hour is exactly equal to the wage. Okay? Here, the marginal expense of labor is actually greater than the wage, right? So it costs more than just the wage rate to hire one more worker. So let's think about this. Let's say we have 10, and we'll say 5, and we'll say 11, and that'll be 6, and we'll say 12, and that can be 7, right? And I'll stop there. I don't really know powers of 13 or multiples of 13. So 10 times 5, so the wage times the quantity will give us the total wage bill. Right, so at 5 times 10, we have a wage bill of 50. At 6 times 11, that's equal to 66. And 7 times 12, I'm going to have to bust out a calculator for that. Unfortunately, because I don't remember my times tables. Right, so here we go. 7 times 12 is, we're getting there, don't worry. I did some other math earlier, evidently. 84. Alright, so 84. Okay, so what is the marginal expense of labor. So we're moving up 1 hour of labor. So the marginal expense of labor, right? Well, that's nothing. And 16, and this is what? 84 minus 16 is what? All right, 18. Okay. And so here, notice that the wage is 11, but the marginal expense of labor is 16, which means that hiring one more worker isn't costing me, another dollar, right? It's not costing me another dollar per hour. It's costing me $16, right? And hiring another one after that is going to cost me another $18, right? And so what we have is a situation where the marginal expense of labor is actually greater than the wage rate. And so the interesting thing that a lot of labor economists will say, right, is that if you have a case, so if there is a firm with monopsony power, which is basically just an upward sloping labor supply curve, then the minimum wage, right, specifically raising the minimum wage will actually cause the firm to hire more labor, right? And this flies in the face of everything that you've learned, right? Or at least you should have learned, right? Normally we say that minimum wages are nothing but a price floor, right? If we impose a minimum wage on a market, it's going to decrease the quantity demanded and increase the quantity supplied. The difference between those two is, of course, on people that are unemployed. Minimum wage should actually reduce the number of people that find jobs. And here, with monopsony power, the argument is that the minimum wage can actually increase employment, right? It actually leads to firms hiring more people, okay? So I'll go through this in the next video.